first I want to open up the class. So we are here tonight for week 2, and we're going to talk about planning and policy at the regional and local levels. We've got two folks in our transportation world who's been very instrumental in the work that they've done in the city and also for the region. So I'm very honored to bring them back to speak. First is Margi Bradway from Metro. She's our Planning and Development Deputy Director, and also Art Pearce with PBOT. And PBOT and Art was once our alumni of the course. So he's got a lot to share with some of the work and that he's been doing in the policy and planning groups. So we're in for a treat because these are kind of a lot of new different changes, new trends in transportation planning. And so this is going to be a first time I'm seeing their presentations, and they're one of our original speakers. But first of all, I want to share what we received in terms of our privilege wheel. So Ananda, can you share the next slide? So we're just going to share the 3 slides of this, and I want to show you the results of your privilege wheel homework assignments. And for Art and Margi, who have not seen this, I've used this for most of my courses, and I use it as an opening exercise to see where we are and see where we are in terms of our demographics and our students. And it's an exercise that looks at our privilege. Essentially, the rounder you are, as you see this, Nanda, can you go to the next one? The rounder you are in this exercise, the more privileged you are. And the more skewed you are, the more you have to work a little bit more in life. So it encompasses so many things in life of education, race, height, ethnicity, where we are in the world. So I actually want to kind of get a feel from one of the students as when you're looking through this and when you're working on the exercise, were there any sort of epiphany that had come up in this work that you've done? Feel free to unmute yourself and talk. And just share. I just want some reflection from this exercise. Anybody? Everyone? Not anyone?
I'll jump in with a comment.
Okay.
With the Christian hegemony, so thinking about Christianity in the U.S. and the world, although I'm not somebody that's actively religious, I still had to think about my relatives and where I came from and how that influenced the arc for where I am today. So some of these things made me think less so much about me specifically, but also my family's past and history and how some of these things are wrapped into my privilege today.
Thank you, Henrik. Nanda, let's go to the next slide to show the next set. Anybody else want to share some reflection from this work, from this project exercise?
Yeah, I'll share a little bit. When I do these types of exercises, I almost feel like it's like I'm very aware that I have a lot of marginalized identities, but it's always very interesting to see them on paper, and kind of like see like that lack of a lack of privilege, and being like, oh wow, yeah, like I almost kind of like forget, and like when I look at it, I'm like, wow, on the circle, like it looks like my identities don't really like take up a lot of space. And so when I kind of think about it, like when I finished the activity, I kind of looked back at this circle and like realizing kind of how much less shaded mine was, and kind of like remembering to tell myself like I'm allowed to take up space with those marginalized identities that I hold, even if sometimes I forget kind of what those are. until like an action kind of smacks me in the face. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not a white man. So
yeah, it's a reminder. It's a reminder. Anybody else want to share any more thoughts on this?
I can kind of give the opposite perspective from Angelica, the white man. And I grew up very poor. You know, both my parents grew up and either outlived or had 3 fathers, you know, through the course of their childhood. And so they had very tough beginnings. We were very poor. We lived in the poorest zip code in Portland, North Portland, by the projects. But to Angelica's point, being a white male just helped me. In other words, I didn't have as many roadblocks. And so my circle was pretty filled in, and it humbles me to go and know that that wasn't the case for a lot of the peers who might have been people of color that were my neighbors. And so it's that whole fish swimming downstream instead of up approach. It really gave me a pause to just be humbled and try and help. And I think that's what your preamble was at the beginning of it. So
thank you. Thank you for your reflections and thoughts. Like I said, I always do this at the beginning of each of my class, just because we are in community with each other. And even though we're living in this COVID era and we're virtual, we're still in community with each other, and we want to see each other as neighbors, but some have more privilege than others. And these are eye-opening to folks, and they're good reminders, but it's good to respect where we are, respect our cohorts and everyone that we share space with. So thank you for participating in this. It was very enlightening. Each time I do it, I've always learned more about myself, and I learn more about everyone that I am in community with. So I want to also mention a few things that I forgot. There is a Facebook page for this class, if you're not familiar with. It's not as active as it has been, but I always want to bring it up to the students, and it's called it's just called Portland Traffic and Transportation. So if you go into that, if you're on Facebook and you're active and you want to engage within the virtual space, that's also outside of our Slack channel with other alumni, you're welcome to go in there and request to join. And I'm one of the administrators on there, so that's an opportunity for us to also build community among all the others that have taken this course. So I will, I see we have we're at capacity for students right now. We're at 27, so I'm going to start with the course. And first off, want to welcome Margi Bradway from Metro, and Margi's going to talk about the work that's been taking place right now with at Metro. So let's we haven't had a chance to do this. So let's.
Good evening, everyone. Hi. Good to see you. This is one of my favorite things to do. I don't know how many years I've done this. Actually, I think Art and I have done this. We've been on the same night for at least 4 or 5 years, but I really enjoy the chance to talk with people and students and kind of get out of my regular bureaucratic day-to-day work and use this as an opportunity to think a little bit bigger. I'm gonna give a slideshow, and I'm not offended if you turn off your camera, but I do want, a good conversation afterwards. I'm gonna try to give you a little history of Metro, kind of an introduction of who we are, talk a little bit about transportation and land use, and then emerging trends. Before I launch in my slideshow, a little bit about myself. I'm a recovering attorney. I used to practice law years ago. After I practiced law, I spent 6 years working for ODOT in the director's office, and then 4 fabulous years working with Art at PBOT, and I've been now at Metro, the regional government, for 4 years. That time working on transportation, and now transportation and land use. So with that, I think I'm going to share screen and to just So now I might share screen and have to get it into the display. It's having a hard time. Let's see what stay with me here. See if I'm in display mode. No, you got like the wrong thing, right? Do you see like a Zoom? Oh no, do you see it?
Yes, we got your presentation. It's great.
Okay. So I think what happened, okay, it jumped on my other screen. I have two screens here. So if I look the other screen, if I don't look directly at the camera, forgive me, because it jumped over there. So again, welcome. So when I say metro region, what do I mean? Well, here's a picture of the metro region. It's large, includes the suburbs. So it includes all of Multnomah County, a good portion, most of Washington County, and about 2/3 of Clackamas County. And I'll get a little bit into the urban growth boundary. Overall, the Portland region, so that map that I put up there, we just got new census data, which is very exciting in our world. The Portland region now represents 1.6 million people, with a 12.3% increase in the past 10 years in population. And this third statistics blows me away. In the Portland region, we represent 39% of the state. So a majority of the population is located in the Portland metro region. And we saw large increases in BIPOC communities in the latest census data. And I could spend a lot of time on that, but I won't. But if you ever want more information on census data or region, we have quite a bit of information. So what is Metro? Who are we? A lot of people don't know. So we are unique regional government. We have independently elected officials, and we have many different functions. Beyond transportation and land use, we have a parks and nature. We own many parks like Oxbow Park or Blue Park. We do majority of the garbage and recycling in the region. We also run a lot of the arts center and the venues, everything from the convention center to the expo. And most people know us for the Oregon Zoo. That's what most people, if you do a public poll. And then we also do planning, development, and research. And I'm the deputy director of the planning, development, and research department. In our department, so this represents the different sections. We have a manager for each section. We do regional transportation planning, which is a federal function. So that's a federal MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization, as well as transportation resources. So that's transportation funding. All the federal funding in the region flows through us. We do land use and development, investments area and corridor planning. That's a corridor planning for, say, the next light rail line or the next bus rapid transit. We have a data research center and a modeling center. And then new to us, we have a new teams, and we're structuring new teams around affordable housing and supportive housing services. And so why do we have these new teams, new structure? Well, the voters decided in 2018 to pass an affordable housing measure. This was something that our staff had been working on for a long time, and we are quite proud that it passed in every county. And it's the second largest bond in the state of Oregon, $652 million bond with a goal to reconstruct 2,100 affordable housing homes. We are on track. We've met 54% of our goals, and we are delivering on our promises. We're actually ahead of schedule in terms of getting houses built on the ground. The voters then further expanded Metro's role in Metro's authority by passing what we call a supportive housing services measure, really focused on the homeless community or the houseless community. And it's really a partnership between us and the 3 counties to provide services. We call those wraparound services like rent assistance, daycare, to really complement the affordable housing bond that passed and hopefully keep people in homes. So that's all under our department as well. But how we started, so that's recently for Metro, but really the foundation of Metro goes all the way back to Oregon's history around land use. Governor Tom McCall was a visionary. He saw that we must tackle our land use issues if we were able to have a good quality of life. He was also the governor that preserved all of our beautiful Oregon coast. But he understood that we needed to have controls on our land use in order to have green spaces, but also farms. Around that time, so in 1973, the state of Oregon adopted its nation's first growth management laws. Senate Bill 100. Soon after, there was acknowledgement that there needed to be a body that oversaw all the land use in 1978. That's when they created Metro. Metro at that time already, then they combined with the Metro Planning Organization, which had a federal funding role. 1979 was the first urban growth boundary. 1992, voters further expanded Metro's authority. And then in 1995 was when we adopted our first 2040 growth plan. And that is the foundation of all the planning work that we do in the region. And that work also trickles down to all of our city partners. So their comprehensive plan is based on our 2040 growth plan. Here's a picture of the 2040 growth concept. It's based around centers and corridors and regional centers. And the idea is to create condensed places, condensed town centers, and then corridors where people travel across the region. We are looking now, the growth concept obviously is starting to age, and we actually attended several meetings today to talk about what is the path to update this growth concept, which will be a major body of work that Metro will take on the next 2 to 3 years. We see growth happening where we intended, where the growth plan intended. There's great examples that are called out here. This is a little bit of a wonky map, but where you see kind of the darker colors, you see that that growth happened in the central city. And you know, there's examples of Wilsonville or Hillsborough, which were identified town centers, and that's where we saw growth. So we feel like the growth plan is working as it should. I love this picture. This is a picture of Cornelius and Forest Grove that were brought into our urban growth boundary. And you can just, it's a great visual of why it helps to have an urban growth boundary that creates density in the middle there very clearly with green space all around it, as Governor McCall intended. So why does Metro care about transportation, you know, other than that's our federal authority? We know that travel patterns are regional. These numbers need to be updated with the 2020 census data, but we have a lot of, we call this the octopus. It can be a little bit of a weird map to look at, but the point being is that before COVID, so these are numbers before COVID, 58% of Washington County would leave every single day to go to work, or 42%, and 58% would stay. 41% of Clark County would leave every day, and you can, you know, go from there. But there was a lot of travel to and from, especially on the commute into the various counties, to and from the counties, and to and from the downtown center, creating kind of a need for a regional solution to transportation. Metro, as a MPO, we do the regional transportation plan. It's a 25-year plan. It's updated every year, or every 5 years, excuse me. Thank God it's not updated every 5 years. Next update is in 2023. We start ramping up for it. It's a massive document. In fact, I keep my copy. This is how important the RTP is. I always have it open and right next to my desk. But it really establishes all of our regional policy and plans. And it also establishes what projects are eligible for federal funding. Really, the regional transportation plan is it's a federal document. And so when we go to seek federal funding for, say, a light rail project, it has to be consistent with all the policies and projects in the RTP. We use an outcome-based approach to the regional transportation plan. This last one, we led with we call our 4 priority areas of equity, safety, climate, and congestion relief. That was something that JPAC, which is the elected officials who oversee this, prioritized with our council, Metro Council. We also, as part of that, implement our climate smart strategy. In 2013, the Oregon legislature told Metro to, I think we were willingly, but we agreed to implement a climate smart strategy, which has a toolbox for local, state, and regional actions really aimed at transportation and land use. Every time we do an RTP update, we also update our climate smart strategy, but we identified policy changes, partnerships, and technical assistance needed. And then we then crosswalk that with our grants and our resources. So many of the things that we do in our day-to-day activities are really trying to implement climate smart with things like transit-oriented development or emerging technology grants. We also have grants, our 2040 planning grants are for local communities to do better downtown planning, a lot of density planning and urban planning. I think it's been positive. There's smart land use investments. The transit has benefited the region. Again, this is kind of old data that needs to be updated with the new census data. But we have had a lot of success in reducing overall vehicle miles traveled, and particularly vehicle miles traveled per capita. Portland is one of the lowest. And we also, those are numbers before COVID, of course, but we ranked fairly high in transit given the size of our city. And we've consistently, there was many years where VMT per capita in our region was being reduced, and now it's leveled out, and it's a weird space right now from the lockdown. I'm going to talk about that later. We look at in the RTP, high crash corridors based on safety data and fatality data, but we also compare that to where BIPOC communities or communities of color live. And it's very clear in our analysis and our work that people of color are disproportionately impacted by traffic safety in our region. Metro has been outspoken about the need for more investment in large corridors like 82nd and TV Highway. We've been working on several of those large corridors with our partners. There's a lot of need in the region. This is from the 2018 RTP, and you can find this map online, but more than $42 billion was planned. And that's projects that we need funding for to go seek. So there's needs across our region, and Metro plays a role in terms of facilitating that funding or allocating that funding. What is tricky about Oregon, and when we talk about transportation funding, is that Oregon is unique in that we do not have a sales tax. That really hurts us on transportation. I like this slide because it compares us to other states in the Pacific Northwest and shows how much sales tax they're really putting towards transportation. And if you look at our overall funding, it's very small. So our need is great, and our resources are small. I think many of you probably are aware that Metro put on the ballot a transportation measure I guess it was just last year in 2020, time is flying by. That measure failed. I'm happy to talk about, lessons learned there. But one of the reasons I believed in that transportation measure and our Metro Council put it forward was to fill this massive gap that has been left with lack of a sales tax. We also, you heard the voters passed affordable housing, but I think we continue to not only look at needs in transportation, but needs in affordable housing. This shows the shortage, the demand versus the supply. I think all of you know that the supply is very short and the need is great on housing as well. There is also just challenges in terms of how is Portland still affordable, and affordable for whom? This is just a very telling slide talking about the median household income and how it has grown or not grown over the past 10 years. And you can see that Black and Native American households saw 1/10 of growth in income as the rest of the people in the region. And so while housing becomes less available and more expensive, as well as other things in our region, it further increases the gaps and disparities. I also just want to acknowledge that there were land use decisions made, and certainly, I don't know if you're familiar with redlining, but it is really the racist past of urban planning. Urban planning in the nation has a racist past, and Portland Metro region is no different. That's something that my director and I, Alyssa Gertler, are committed to changing. We had Tamika Butler come and do a workshop with all of our staff. She's a well-known consultant who speaks on equity. And I just really like this quote. This is something that she said at our staff retreat. And I think it's worth reading from her voice. We have to recognize that when white people come into our spaces with their craft beer and their record players and their bikes, all of a sudden the way we are treated in our own communities is different. because the reality is we're perfectly segregated to the other side of town. But now that you can't afford your side of the town, you want to be our side of the town. And now we're an inconvenience. And that just, to me, really just highlights the problems we have in our communities around displacement. And we have tough work ahead of us to reverse those wrongs. The growth of urban planning and racism. Also, many of you by now, I hope, know the story of how I-5 Bridge took out the albino community, the all Black community that was in the heart of the city of Portland. Again, completely displacing communities of color. And this, again, is part of Oregon's racist past. So what are we doing about it? Like I said, there's commitment from our leadership, my council, but certainly myself and Alyssa, that we are looking at what we call community stability, which in my mind is the opposite of displacement. We have created a community placemaking program where we directly give funds to community members who are trying to stay in place. We have increased the amount of equity and outreach engagement we do with equity communities, and then prioritize projects of people of color. One thing I'm very proud of is we made a goal 2 years ago to make sure that every grant dollar that comes out of our department has criteria with an equity lens. And we have 10 different grant programs, and I'm happy to say that that's now in place. So every single dollar that goes out of our department, we have some kind of equity criteria, equity lens that goes out with it. And this is an example of what some of the creative ways we're trying to address displacement. We're still learning, but Metro led the planning process for the Southwest Corridor is a major light rail line. It's not funded, but we did all the planning work for it. And we created a coalition of communities where we let the community lead a conversation about what they needed along those light rail line. They were empowered to make decisions. They were empowered to identify where they wanted housing to stay. They identified the fact that they needed a local bank to stay because that local bank really needed to support the business, and how they wanted the transit to serve their communities. And now this has gone on and gotten more grant money, and the group has stayed together to continue to kind of advocate for what local communities need before transportation investment comes in. And we hope to replicate this model on other light rail lines or bus rapid transit lines, because it was so successful in Southwest. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time towards the end talking about what changes have we seen. I gave you a lot of slides and presentations about policies and plans that were 25-year plans. They're based on data that happened, frankly, before COVID and the lockdown. We've been grappling as transportation and land use professionals on how we address these changes and where do we go forward. We know that the pandemic widened the gaps between inequity. We know, for example, that COVID hit Black and Latina Americans much harder than the rest of the community. We also know that that there's essential workers. 44% of lower income Americans say they cannot work from home. No, wait, did I get that? That they can work from home, I'm sorry, but 76% of upper income Americans can. Women's wages have fallen, taking the burden of watching children during this time. We know that discrimination has also increased, with 33% of Asian immigrants reporting an increase in harassment. So this recession and the impacts of COVID have only made the disparities worse across the nation and our region. So acknowledging that, I also want to look at a little bit of transportation data and how that has also changed. You can see some of these lines are complete. We continue to collect data, but what we saw is that people stopped traveling right here. This is when COVID hit, right? And everything came to a halt, and then they started traveling more, and then it dipped, and then it dipped, and now it's less again. So people are traveling less overall. We started tracking freight routes and arterial routes. I'll tell you something really interesting. When we started to look at this data, we noticed that that traveling on arterials and local streets was a lot less, but some arterials were higher than others, like Columbia Boulevard and sections of 82nd. So we asked ourselves, why could that be? And sure enough, all of the arterials that had increased volumes were connected to some kind of facility, Amazon facility, basically, distribution center. So it was interesting to see that if an arterial was located on a distribution center, then it was much more likely to have higher traffic during COVID than not, which makes sense. So again, who worked from home and who was able to stay from home, you can see that the bottom, middle, and upper, the higher class that you are, basically, the more likely you are able to work from home. And the lower class you are, the more likely that you are an essential worker. And I think this is really important for professionals to take in mind, because often we like to talk about the status of the world as we see it, which in this case is from our home, but that's not necessarily the case for many Americans. Transit went down. We know that. Transit ridership is much, much lower than it has been. New York City just posted that their transit ridership is at 40% across their system. But if you look deeper into TriMet's data, what we found is that many low-income people still rely on transit. So those that maintained the highest amount of ridership served the lowest income people. So again, essential workers, even though transit is down, I think it's important to say essential workers are still taking the bus to where they need to go. Here, we are seeing changes. This is straight line data. It's a little hard to read, but basically across the nation, we're seeing changes in the peak hour. I think this is one that could stay, a trend that could stay. It's fascinating to me that the peak used to be very sharp in the morning and very sharp in the evening. Now it's much more flattened out. It starts ramping up at 3 o'clock and slowly dying down at 8 o'clock. And then there's also all sorts of peaks on the weekend. And I think we are doing an emerging trend study to understand that and trying to figure out how much of that is just weekend travel and how much of that is people ordering their Uber Eats, or how much of that is, getting your Amazon delivery by Friday. We're doing another, I guess I didn't announce that we are in the process of really doing a deep dive into these emerging trends. And here are some other things we're going to take a look at. E-commerce is quintupled. It is through the roof. We know that has impacts to not only the transportation system, but the urban form. Unfortunately, we also saw traffic deaths rise quite a bit during COVID. I think prior to the COVID and the lockdown, a lot of professionals would draw a correlation between VMT, vehicles miles traveled, and traffic fatalities. COVID proved that wrong. VMT went down, less people driving, but we saw an increase in traffic fatalities. Basically, people willing to drive and much faster and much more dangerous. But good news is we saw bicycling boom in many places across the nation. And then we also have seen kind of a trend in an increase, and this is part to the Biden administration, in electric vehicles and electric mobility across the board. So these are things we're looking into. This is just a snapshot of what we're looking into in the amount of emerging trends research. I wanted to put this up here because I think I didn't have time to go through every one of these trends, but these are the things that we're looking at. And I know you're all looking at your research papers as well. So I thought, well, maybe I'll put this up here and give you guys some idea, because I think these are some of the things that we're tracking to see, is this just a temporary change, or is it a permanent trend? So with that, I'll open it up for questions. We can do questions now, or we can wait until Art is done.
You can take one or two that are specific to your
Okay.
presentation. So I want to open that up. And then we have a few minutes before we start with Art. I see Joan's hand up. Joan, would you like to ask the question?
Yeah, I actually have a question about your last slide. I noticed that the last item was recreational cycling boom continues. And I'm wondering if recreational is an intentional use there? Because, and I mean, I know that there was a lot of recreational use, but specifically I'm curious because my understanding is that for as much as bikes have been really selling, that e-bikes have been going mad. And that strikes me as more utility cycling. I mean, yeah.
Well, again, this is something that we want to look into, and we're Fairs and Pearce, our consultant, put this table together. And I do think, and I think the you know, I'm a big cyclist. I do both, you know, transportation and recreational, but I bike with my kids to school every day. And I don't particularly like the line being drawn. I think it's a pretty fuzzy line. But that term was being used from the bike shops. I think if anybody's tried to buy a bike the past couple of years, they know they're completely slammed. And so the bike industry has been saying the recreational cycling boom is here. I think what we have to tease out is how much is that carrying over to cycling as a commute, bike, or transportation. And it's hard when commutes are down and a lot of people are working home. But I think that's a really good comment, Joan. And, you know, we might want to revisit how we phrase that. But thanks. Yeah, I can just go to the next person. Do you want me to facilitate? You go ahead.
Yeah, Keith, you can ask.
Thank you, Tui. Thank you, Margie. The Let's Get Moving was a really important ballot measure, and really sad to see it voted down. And I know there were some technical issues on taxing, but what's the plan now? It's such a large plan and it's on the table. Is there any design to kind of reboot, make some modifications, and then give it back to the voters?
Yeah, I'm going to share a screen again, if you don't mind, because I was prepared for this question. I thought, do I include it? But I'm just, for those who are not familiar, can you see that? So our Get Moving proposed measure 26-118, we proposed a package that we put out to the voters. We worked 2 years on it. I was proud of the package we put together. It hit when COVID hit, and we had, you know, so here are that's the package, 17 corridors, regional programs. It was an employer tax and a business tax right at the time where a lot of employers were feeling the economic downturn. And then we had very vocal opposition, mostly from Nike, honestly. And so, yeah, it did not pass. Do we plan to take it out to the voters again? Yes. This is something that my President Lynn Peterson is absolutely dedicated to. Right now, though, we're talking 23 or 24, and that just has to do with election cycles. Frankly, she's going to run again on the ballot. So yes, we're taking it back out to the voters. I think what you'll see is a table resetting, and we'll have to go back and revisit the projects as well, but certainly you'll see us revisiting the revenue mechanism that created a lot of opposition. So thank you, Keith. And if you have any thoughts on the kind of the package of the revenue mechanism, we're all ears at Metro.
I want to take one more question. I remember seeing Hendrick's
hand.
Oh,
do you mind if I take a question in the chat that's
sure
related? So why did Nike oppose it? Well, I can't speak for Nike. The amount of opposition that Nike, you know, they had put over $1 million into the opposition. I was frankly floored. Some of the business community had expressed concerns about a tax, and I showed you that the other measures that Metro put on were also a tax. Well, one of them was supportive housing services had part income, part business tax. So I think there was a little bit of pushback from already being taxed by that. That said, our measure, we really worked hard to lead with equity, and we had a lot of investments in equity areas. And Nike was opposing at the same time that they're also, you know, supporting Colin. You know, we had the Black Lives Matter conversation going on. We had Nike doing Black Lives Matters ad and telling everybody they care about equity. And at the same time, they're opposing a package that I thought was the biggest investment in equity areas that we've ever seen. So I don't know why. I was frankly surprised at the level of opposition, and I've still got some maybe hard feelings over it. So You'll have to ask Nike next time you see somebody who works for them why they opposed it. Yes, Kathy. Hi, Kathy. It's been a while.
Hi.
How are you?
Good.
Good to see you.
Yeah. So some of the goals sometimes can conflict with each other. I'm thinking in particular, you know, you have the 4 major goals of equity, climate, safety, and congestion. And there are times when you try to achieve one and you're going to negatively impact another. So do you have a way of prioritizing which of those kind of move forward?
Yes. Were you listening into a Metro Council work session 2 weeks ago? Because Kathy, that's exactly the conversation we had with our Metro Council. We had that conversation in 2018 on the regional transportation plan, and there was not enough agreement with the elected officials in our region. Mind you, they come from Clackamas County, Washington County, to prioritize one over the other. That does make it very difficult when you're trying to provide input on a project from a staff perspective. What this council talked about, there's several new members of the council that have changed over since 2018. They have signaled to us that they would like to revisit these priorities and weight them, and particularly signaling to us that they would like to weight equity and climate more than the others. I think you'll see that with this new, I think we have a more progressive Metro Council and a more progressive JPAC right now. And I think you'll see some of that being weighted as we go into the 2023 RTP. So excellent question.
Great, thank you, Margie. I want to move forward and have Art bring up Art's presentation and have him come next. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'm going to stick around for Art's presentation, and then if there's any Q&A at the end. But I always enjoy Art's presentations too.
This is the new one. We'll see how well it goes. Good evening, everybody. My name is Art Pearce. I'm manager of policy planning and projects at the Bureau of Transportation, but I've been in the transportation scene here in Portland for a very long time. And as Tui indicated, I took this course in 1997, I think it was, as I was working at Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon, supporting direct service programs, and very focused on affordable housing, but started having an interest in transportation and felt like this was a good way to get kind of an introduction to this environment and see if I really liked it. And it did. It led me to applying to the MERC program and getting an internship at PBOT in 1998, and I've been there ever since. So I don't know whether it was a good lead in or not, but it definitely was a direct line path into a career in transportation, having taken this course. I'm glad you're all here. It's a fun way to get a good understanding of the transportation scene in Portland. And it's a place that there's no end of work to be done. So we need your help. So I'm glad that you're here and you're interested in figuring out how you can help us improve the transportation system. I was a planner for many years and then a project manager. And now I manage this team that is kind of trying to connect the dots between long-range planning, project planning and area planning, capital project delivery. So all the project managers who are overseeing the design and delivery of the capital projects, the physical projects that are happening out in the street. And then the active transportation and safety division, which really works on programmatic response to helping people adapt to how the city changes. So they run the Safe Routes to School program, the bike share program, smart trips, Vision Zero program, a whole litany of sort of service programs, the scooter program, all these different things that are lots of things you've, I'm sure, interacted with being in Portland. And really, I started thinking about this in the last couple of years as us being a change management office. Essentially, we're helping shift the physical realm and the sort of cultural realm of Portland to help us adapt to change and help us adapt to the city growing in hopefully a successful way. So I have a presentation for you that is essentially me trying to capture this sort of emerging thought process, because what I started realizing is there's a lot of information out there around change management for organizations, famous books and speakers, but there really isn't a whole lot of information about change management for cities. How do we take where we want to go and even have clear authority and direction to go and break it down into real operational steps? So I'll share a screen and share this presentation with you, and you can give me feedback about whether I should ever give it again. We'll see how it goes. Let's see. Did that work? No. Okay. How are we doing? You can see it?
Yeah,
All
we're
right.
good.
Okay. So in my vast search of the internet, I found a starting quote. I like progress, but I hate change. Apparently attributed to John Bon Jovi. I don't know if that's actually true. But here's a, let's see if hopefully this will work as well. A little starting off with a video of a place far, far away.
5 hours a week out of people's lives. Who the hell are you or Mike Bonin or anyone else to do that?
Mike Bonin and Eric Garcetti call their plan to cut lanes from major roads Vision Zero, but residents are calling it Zero Vision.
We can't go anywhere. We can't go to the store. We can't go to the doctors. You're just kind of stuck here now. I mean, this is lunacy.
This is a huge burden on our community. Nobody wants to drive here anymore.
In an apparent effort to discourage drivers from using the roads, these two elected officials have conspired to chop long-standing designated secondary arterial highways in half. They claim it's in the name of safety, but many residents believe their actions have put drivers, cyclists, and pedestrians on a path to tragedy.
All right, I'll stop it there. This is like a nightmare sequence that plays in my head many nights, honestly. But I felt like it was sort of representative of just the level of misunderstanding that occurs when we are trying to put forth progressive transportation initiatives and how strongly they can be misperceived in terms of our intentions and how well they'll work. And, you know, if we sort of pull up and we think about, you know, what is Portland's described vision for our transportation system that really relies on the vision that's established from at the metro level? You know, we're starting with a focus on land use. We're supporting investing in key places, and Portland's really focusing on the short trips. We're focusing on walking for trips 1 mile or less, cycling for trips that are 3 miles or less, and then emphasizing transit as the key mobility option for those trips that can't be served by cycling and walking. Really to make space for those trips that can't be well served or too long to be well served by those mobility options, to leave space for people to drive and for people to move freight, move other goods that need to move around the system, and do so in a way that we're prioritizing equity and improving outcomes for frontline communities. So specifically orienting our investments to bettering those outcomes for those specific communities. So that means we have to change our streets. Our streets need to better prioritize transit, cycling, and walking. And hopefully you're seeing that in the moves that we are making out there today, even during COVID. Many of these investments happened even in the last year. Of adapting the way the streets function to hopefully change the way we understand their use, change who feels safe on the streets, who feels welcome on our streets, and also what feels like a possible use on our streets in terms of people using streets as places for gathering and for commerce. All of these things further those goals of supporting great places and supporting more sustainable, equitable outcomes. But it doesn't always go well. This is my own personal story. I worked on the aerial tram for many years, and it was one of the more traumatic times of my public career. But there was outrage around the conception of the aerial tram. It's now faded into the background. Many have forgotten this story, but I did run into somebody who lived not in that house that I have the picture of, but another house right near it, at a wedding this past weekend, and he seems like he's doing okay. But they did not enjoy this process either. But there was a bigger vision of connecting South Waterfront to OHSU, but not a great way of explaining how this higher outcome can work and can work for those that might have an impact adjacent to it. But it doesn't even take a big project to end up with this type of challenge. A change as small as putting in a diverter at 50th and Lincoln brought out 200-300 people to a school gymnasium where they backed us up onto a stage, really angry at this proposed change and how it would expect them to not be able to drive on Lincoln as part of the process. And so it turns out change is really hard. turns out that it isn't just the change that is the hard part, it's the transitions. It's the understanding of how people adapt to that change. It's the psychological process of that adaptation and how people come to terms with the new situation. The fact that we have new clear edicts around equity and climate that lead us towards more ardents to changing the way the streets are used requires us to do a better job of explaining how we do the work and to help people through that process. So change management information that you can see on the web, like this is around a CEO describing a new org chart, for instance, leads us through these series of stages. And one of the key things I talk about is you need to get through the ending phase, letting go of what you need to let go of before you're ready to move into the new growth and direction. And the city planners and maybe many advocates, many people who are very involved in transportation actually think we are all over here. We're in the process of adjusting and growing. We're moving into that new beginnings phase. But I think there's a large misunderstanding that many in the public are still back at the ending phase and haven't really agreed to this transaction. They don't actually understand how this level of collective action, the collective compromise of deciding to take a little bit longer on your commute by doing it by bus is part of contributing to a useful transportation system for everyone. And so we're finding ourselves in this cycle where there's just a pretty vast misunderstanding between the people doing this work and the people heavily involved in this work and the people experiencing the change on the streets. So thinking about sort of, how do we do this process? I'm going to unpack some tools that we're using as how we are trying to help make this change occur more sustainably and make sure that we're heading in the right direction. So one first thing that Margi talked a little bit about and actually Metro is very key in establishing this, is starting with outcomes-based policy thinking, understanding how individual impacts rate in terms of their ability to direct us towards Vision Zero, to improve health, economic opportunity, equity, resolve climate and congestion. And then as part of PBOT's strategic plan, which I know you heard Chris speak to last week, we are asking these questions. Will this reduce carbon emissions? Will this action reduce, advance equity and address structural racism? One of the key steps that we do is we create platforms for innovations. The RTP is a platform for innovation. So is our transportation system plan at the local level, in which we ratified this walking, cycling, transit, fleets of autonomous vehicles as the hierarchy of transportation. The Rose lanes that you see out there today that are being implemented started with an enhanced transit analysis, looking at, is there a problem with how buses are being impacted by congestion as the city grows, and got council to ratify the fact this was a problem that we wanted to solve. To start out looking at public space, we hosted some public workshops with PSU called Learning by Doing to try to unpack more about how we might think about streets as public spaces and allow more uses in those areas. Some years ago, there was a study tour with elected leaders and downtown business leaders preparing for Central City in Motion to try to soften up that element. And then PBOT itself, as you heard last week, has a strategic plan called Moving to Our Future that does help us really focus in on safety, people movement and goods movement, and asset management. Another key element, as Margi helped unpack, is inclusive, equity-centered involvement and delivery. In fact, I even clipped an image from Margi's local investment teams because I thought that their team did just such a good job with involving deeply and genuinely community in the process of developing the regional transportation measure. For PBOT, we also, on the top right, the community partnerships, invested in direct community partnerships over the last couple of years to try to capacitate community organizations to better be involved in processes. And then the bottom right, we are constantly looking for ways of using this data and information that we have now more access to really center our actions around equity in the plan goals and in plan delivery. It's also really important, certainly as leaders, but I think even as community, to think about where is there momentum and what can help build momentum. Such things as a new elected official. We now have Commissioner Hardesty in week 1 saying that she wants to create public spaces, first in downtown and now all throughout the city. That's a wind in our sails for the Bureau to focus on that and make as much progress as we can when we have such a great leader to help us drive that through. When COVID was emergent, the planning team immediately started looking at what are the changes we might need to anticipate for how the streets might function. We have the technology innovations that Margi spoke to a little bit as well that are constantly coming. And then there's those big moments like San Francisco when they had an earthquake, or when Vancouver had a Olympics. Those are moments to leverage and direct towards making as much progress as we can, changing the city for the better. One of the other shifts, certainly in the last couple of years, very much driven also by really good community advocacy through Better Block and other organizations, is we're doing a lot more tactile action, a lot more pilots. And to create true pilots, it means that you're doing it, you're not sure how it's going to work, you're going to evaluate it and adapt it. So it doesn't mean that you're calling it temporary, but really you mean it's permanent. It means it really needs to be temporary and you need to assess it and see how it works. Better NATO is a great example that started out with a 5-year cycle of pilots where we were testing it out every summer, putting in those white wands, and now we're in construction with the permanent version of it based on how well it demonstrated the need for that. Partnerships with Better Blocks, they've been continuing to do a great job of demonstrating to us and demonstrating to the public and to the business community that there's new ideas we might want to consider. And and sometimes it's much better for them to do that demonstration than for city staff to come out and propose it. PBOT has also shifted our CIP to invest a lot in small project investments. They're much less expensive. They can be done by internal crews. So we're doing a lot more with paint, with those sewer end cap concrete planters and those types of things. And certainly you've seen a lot of permits of business use in the right of way during COVID, when we made the healthy business permits free and sort of threw the right of way wide open to encourage its use over the last year and a half. PBOT also, through the Active Transportation Safety Team, has been offering a whole series of encouragement, incentive programs, and education programs to try to help kids and adults, new arrivals who are arriving to the city, or someone who lives in affordable housing, with new resources to help them adapt to to the new change. If someone moves to a new neighborhood, they're just working out their new routes of how they're going to get to work and how they're going to where to go to the store, and that's a perfect moment to introduce them to the cycling routes that are adjacent to them, or how to use the transit system. Evaluation and true evaluation, I think, is another crucial element. We've been doing a lot more active evaluation, certainly for the Safe Streets program. You've been seeing stickers out on the street, hopefully, where you can scan a QR code and give us feedback on how those programs are going. And similarly with the Rose Lane pilots, we're been evaluating how it's improved bus travel times, and certainly during COVID, it's been a lot faster, but even pre-COVID, we were seeing much faster bus travel times across the Burnside Bridge and routes like that. I think one of the last things that's really important, or a couple last things, is it's really important to understand that bureaucratic systems are naturally fearful. They're nervous, they're risk averse and bureaucratic. And it's a massaging process, both by the public and by government staff, to turn that into that flexible, transparent, tolerant platform for all those great toppings that we can put on top and make it wonderful. And if we move too quickly and blow things up, we tear it apart, or the city's systems respond with more fear, more inflexibility, more obstructionism. And so this is it's a delicate process. We can't just blow everything up all at once. It takes a constant effort to produce more flexibility, produce more partnerships between the city and community and business. Lastly, and this is mostly one that I use for staff internal, but I think it's important to understand there's a need to build trust and to build relationships between community and government and elected officials, that we're on the same team and we're going to try to take some risks together. And I'm a huge Leslie Knope fan, so I couldn't help but throw a quote of hers here. But the ardence with which she approached her work, the sort of stubbornness with which she was unwilling to give up, is the kind of compassion that we want to see city staff taking to their work. And lastly, I think we all need, is particularly in this time of COVID, where everyone is enduring as best they can, is to remember you need to attend to culture constantly and proceed with empathy and care with each other. This is a hard time. People are doing the best they can. And we really need to keep that in mind as we are having hard conversations about change and about how change feels to us on an individual basis. All right. Any thoughts or questions? Keith.
All right, thank you very much. So I've seen a lot of changes with engineering, road quieting, really working on slowing traffic, and then a lot on education. On the enforcement side, in particular, because of distracted driving and how prolific that is now, where is the city in addressing, it's being called the new DUI. Where are we at on that with fatalities rising at such alarming rate?
The main place that we've been focusing our team is around on the automated enforcement systems, because of their thought to be sort of more equitable in their distribution of tickets and those kind of things. We have had a continued challenge, I think, with discussions at City Hall, not with us, around police capacity to take on traffic teams when they're focused on so many other things. So I think it's a continued struggle to decide what's the right balance with that. But it is DUIs and other impairments is a continued contributor to fatalities for sure. It's a real vexing problem. I agree.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Sam, I see your hand up earlier. Would you like to ask a question?
I just wanted to say I was so impressed by the outreach that PBOT did. I watched this video on explaining the walking, biking, transit at 1, 2, 3 miles. I thought that was so effective and so
good, sophisticated,
and years ahead of ODOT and WSDOT. And I'm wondering, how do you work the communication between PBOT and ODOT? It seems like ODOT needs to catch up with your perception, and I don't know, it resonated with me, and I thought, well, you've got the right idea. I wish ODOT would catch up.
Anyway. It's as Margi well knows as well, she and I just happened to go for a run today. We were talking about this. It is a challenge. We have different perceptions of what the right answers are between us at a more localized place and the statewide perspective of what those travel demands and travel needs would be. I do think it's part of linking together the understanding that a shorter trip that is taken by walking, cycling, or transit is creating space for those longer trips, so that we're all running the same system together rather than seeing these systems as in conflict. But I think it's a continued challenge. We spend a lot of time, particularly Margi and I, as liaisons to ODOT projects, to try to really encourage them to better incorporate local priorities and needs in the process of them navigating their process. It is challenging for them. They have a lot of direction that they're gaining statewide from rural legislators. So it isn't that they can just say, oh, we're in Portland, so we're going to change our plan here. So I do, and speaking of empathy from my last slide, I have empathy for the balancing act that they're trying to do, but I certainly think they could listen to us more, for sure.
Great, thanks. I'm gonna call on folks in the order that the hands are raised that I can see. So next up is Kathy.
Hi, thanks. I really like the approach of this change management for cities. I think that makes a lot of sense. I also watched earlier today the video of you and Lisa Parker from Vancouver, and about curating the new street, about how we have to rethink how we interact with the street. And you're taking on a giant thing. I mean, you're basically rethinking the entire street and rethinking your entire relationship with the businesses and the people around the street. And I guess my comment and my question is about the staff that you have to do it with. It seems to me, as a newcomer to Portland, but I've been looking into this, that there's very few staff for the kinds of bold visions that you have. I think that, there are some individuals, you obviously are very psyched to make this happen, but you really need an entire kind of street, you know, when there's like parks and recreation. Leslie Knope had a whole staff of the recreation staff. You know, you have the park, you don't have the recreation half of the equation. So how are we going to get the staff? How are we going to get that recreational part of it to happen? Because it won't otherwise. You know, you can't just expect this to happen. It really does.
Totally. Actually, that presentation and others is part of my strategy. I'm a veteran pitcher. I can't help but do it that way. So, you know, showing up at these events and making presentations around the importance of it. We presented a very similar slideshow to City Council alongside staff from Prosper Portland to try to help them understand how this is part of creating a new vision for how we understand urban place. Really, you know, about how do we connect with, you know, using streets as an anchor for urban place. And I think, you know, council was excited. We're able to get 2 different allocations of ARPA relief funds. I forget what ARPA stands for, COVID relief funds. So I think we're making progress, but you're absolutely right. When I was just looking over staffing allocations this afternoon from the planning team, it's a small number of people that we even can buy with that council support. So it's going to take a lot of collaboration between us and other entities. Venture Portland's been very exciting. Portland Business Alliance has been really supportive. You know, so I think we're going to need to sort of draw everyone in a couple steps closer to figure out how we're going to run this type of system together. The actual creation of the place, sadly, is the easy part. It's how we are going to create equitable, vibrant space together as an ongoing ecosystem, not just a one-day pop-up, you know, is what I'm really daunted by. I think we can do it. I think Portland's the kind of city that can figure this out, but it definitely feels like it's going to be a big lift.
It sounds like your counterpart in Vancouver had about 30 people, and I'm guessing you
I know
a quarter of that.
I was so humbled by having her as part of that because, she's so far ahead of where we are in terms of her.
Staffing is a big part of it. It isn't just the vision, it's actually having the resources.
No, totally agree. Yeah.
Art, are you okay if I chime in?
Yeah, sure.
The group that Art manages is the best group of folks, the most competent, just impressive group of folks I've ever worked with. So, if you are worried about staff, PPP is solid.
There's just not enough of us. We need the bigger army.
Precisely. It needs more capacity, but the group of folks that he has organized is really solid. So it'll probably take time, but they're impressive.
Yeah, we'll get there. Yeah. Thanks, Ian. Yeah.
Thanks. I'm going to take a few more questions before we break. Debbie, you're up next.
Okay. Hello, Art. I live in the St. John's area, and there's been a lot of new development of larger, like 3-story apartments. And there's one that they're developing, like on the Willamette Boulevard near North Richmond towards the St. John's downtown. And I was just, it doesn't look like they have any parking, any area for cars. So I was just thinking that might be something that's kind of part of the development within the city of reducing carbon footprint, maybe.
It is absolutely no. So our peers at the Planning Bureau were able to remove parking minimums for most developments over the recent years. It does put a stress on the surrounding neighborhoods as part of that adaptation cycle. We need to have there be enough options of cycling, walking, and transit for people to meet their needs. And we're in that transition period where we're sort of leading in that direction, but I don't think we have the full complement of supports yet to make that 100% work. And so we definitely hear a lot of concern around the overflow of parking.
Well, the concern is that, okay, so there's a lot, I do see the TriMet bus stops, you know, along Willamette Boulevard, but there are no crosswalks between Southwest Richmond and Southwest Portsmouth, which is where the university is.
Right.
And so for people to access the bus, sometimes they have to cross the street and it's very busy. So I just kind of wanted, you know, to bring that to your attention because it could be a safety issue.
We do have a project. we do have a project coming on Willamette, but I don't know if I know the exact location, whether it's going to meet that. But we did a pilot on Willamette to adjust some striping, and then we're coming in with a project that we got some federal funds, I think through Metro, actually, to do to improve Willamette.
Well, I heard that bike lanes were coming and that the traffic lanes would be reduced, maybe.
I think that's right. And then there should be crossings along the way, but I don't know the details of how many there are.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping for, because I walk along that area.
I'm nearly positive that there'll be crossings embedded throughout that.
And then just one quick question. Do you think they'll be expanding like the parking permit program in the St. John's neighborhood like they have in the Northwest Portland neighborhood?
Over time, I think that there's a sort of progression of parking management that goes from nothing at all, just some time stay limitations, to a permit program. And so many different places are along the progression, working their way along there. Right now, we are doing some pilot investigations on inner Division Hawthorne area as well as the inner Mississippi area. And so hopefully those go well, and then we could be looking at developing some permit programs in some of the other areas. So
great. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I just had some questions.
Oh, that's great. Those are good questions. Yeah.
Great. Thanks. I'm going to take 2 more questions and then we'll break. So Hendrik and then Hammy, and then we'll break and we'll come back for the panel Q&A.
Great. Thank you. My question is in regards to internal challenges. You know, sometimes if you have a policy or planning or an idea, it doesn't always match up well with like engineering or communications. And I'm sure there's often points of conflict there. So my question is what tools do you use? What's your communication approach to talk with partners internally that maybe your ideas or, you know, permits structured doesn't align with the way things have been done before? And how do you initiate that change?
Great question. It probably depends on how good of a day I'm having, I guess. When I'm doing well, I probably figure out a good way to finesse it and sort of work through it, you know, methodically, trying to, you know, better explain how this connects to our strategic plan, you know, sort of using those platforms for innovation and say, you know, we agreed as a bureau that we want to be prioritizing reducing our climate impact. This is an example of us doing that. Let's figure out how we can do that together. Let's not debate about sort of whether we're aligned. We've already agreed as a bureau that we're taking that on. Not everyone feels like they signed that compact, so there's definitely moments in which it's less graceful. And I'm a nice guy, but I'm also somewhat stubborn. So on my less good days, I sometimes knock into people, and I don't know. Margi's seen me.
Yeah, no, you do well. Art does well. This is our in our day-to-day jobs. I just chime in and where I think I've grown to learn in this space that when people bring certain expertise to the table, they often bring it from what's the lens in which they're trained. I also find that certain personality types are drawn to certain types of expertise, right? People who work in finance are numbers people. They're the cross the T's, dot the I's kind of people. Your engineers are more, kind of type A. Your planners are not. They're your innovators. They're big thinkers. And so you have a mix of expertise, but also a mix of personality types. So I really try to work at putting myself in their shoes. I know that sounds cliche, but saying, well, like, how are they viewing this? What do they need to get out of the room? The engineer often wants to just make sure they can stamp it at the end of the day. So just trying to kind of see it from their point of view, knowing that I bring a different lens than anybody sitting across the table from me, but
nice.
Art's not giving himself enough credit.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Art and Margi. So one more before we break. Hammy, would you like to ask your question?
Hi, yeah, thanks for presenting. So my question is about kind of what Margi brought up with regard to reduced VMT, the vehicle miles traveled, and what we've seen actually happen, which is that crashes and fatalities and serious injuries have actually increased in the past couple of years, even with the reduced VMT. So I wonder what PBOT is doing to do quick build projects, which I saw mentioned in this kind of strategic plan, that can be used to affect the whole city rather than just, I think what's been problematic, which is central city being advantaged over the rest.
Yeah, so we actually just met today. Also, all these questions are like rattling through my day. I met with the Quick Build team today as well to better understand their proposals for next fiscal year. And so most of the Quick Build projects actually have been invested in in East Portland and in the sort of inner neighborhoods, but there's been really dispersed investment. Many of the little changes you see, if you're biking to work or the new crossing that comes in, a lot of those are coming in through quick builds. And those are ones, if we keep the cost down and reduce the amount of like civil change that we have to do in terms of stormwater, we can do those relatively efficiently. We have an allocation from House Bill 2017 money from the statewide transportation package that passed 4 years ago, that we allocated about $2.5 million towards quick build investments. So that's the main fund that we're using to focus in. Our director has been very supportive. I think would like us to do more. We don't have an additional funding stream yet to do that, but that's one of the priorities for me, is to continue to capacitate it, because I really feel like it's the most effective way for us to respond to specific community issues rather than a long range 5-10 year big transportation investment, which we also need to do, but they just take a really long time. It's a great question. It's a key move for us to make sure that we're moving fast enough. The world is changing around us really, really quickly. So.
Great, thanks everyone. Why don't we break for 10 minutes and then we'll come back for some more questions if you have some more questions, and then we also can talk about the project and the scavenger hunt game. So presentation, I think you can use it.
All right, I'll do it again. Thank you.
Shall we take a poll?
All right, it's a keeper.
It's a keeper. Okay. Yeah. Great. It's different from what you presented before.
I know, I've never done it. I mean, yeah, it's very different than my previous show. It has been very similar to Margi's, and I felt like it might be a good compliment. Margi can cover the environment, and I can go into the philosophy a little bit.
It's where we should be headed to some degree for a change. I want to bring us back to continue on this rich conversation and to open up this time for panel Q&A for you to ask any more questions. I know there are some great questions prior to our break, but we can spend another 10-15 minutes. So I see some hands up. So I'll start. Joan, you can go first.
Thanks. So I have a question about how you balance. I'm going to guess that as transportation people and planners, you're probably not inclined to build lots of roads, and you would generally like to see more investment in transit and active transportation and those sorts of things. And yet you're having to, I'm going to just guess, balance out demands of people who maybe don't see things that way, or who are, deeply enmeshed in car culture, I might say. And so I guess I'm wondering what happens when you sort of like broker some really good compromise and you feel like you've done something really good, and then here come, I'm going to say bike people because I'm a bike person and they're the ones who I see being really fired up about things. And then here come the bike people being like, PBOT, you jerks, or Metro or whoever, like, why are you want us all to drive? Why aren't you doing more? Why can't you be more like, so, and one of the reasons I'm asking is because I suspect that there are a lot of folks in Metro and PBOT, and actually I know in ODOT, who would like to see visions maybe more like all, more stuff for bikes. So can you just talk,
Sure.
Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Margi, you should start.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, first of all, I don't mind when people get fired up. Art likes to say that there are people caring loudly. And I will even say that to my staff. I mean, there are times in transportation measure where that room was packed and we had public testimony at the door. And I said, guys, people care. So I love that people care. And if you're a little bit mad or a little bit fired up when you care, that's okay. You care. So that never phases me to kind of have people really engaged. The bigger issue, though, is when you're trying to move forward, maybe change, as Art said, or put forward bike ped proposals where you have people just comfortable with cars. That's the status quo. And so oftentimes you've got to really try to go back and communicate about the outcomes. That's kind of what Art was saying in terms of like having that platform. What are you trying to do here? You know, I love the video of the road diet. You know, when I worked at PBOT, I oversaw some of the road diets. Art and I both had phone calls going off the hook of like, you know, commuting to work is 3 seconds late. And, you know, you try to like hear it out and be like, oh, I'm so sorry. You have to wait another 3 seconds. And I just tried to find the right time to say, you do know a 12-year-old girl died there trying to go to school. And that's why we put the project there. And then you can kind of hear them go silent. And you're like, so that's how this project started, was to address that fatality. And you really just, you know, try to bring people out of this, like, you know, driving's a privilege, parking is driving's a right, having's a right, and just try to talk about community outcomes. And you'll never get some people there. Some people will not care. But I actually find that a lot of people in Portland are quite compassionate and caring. And if you try to explain it based on equity or climate, you can get people there. Unfortunately, we don't have often that place to have those one-on-one conversations, because I feel like that's when the breakthrough moments happen in terms of just, and you were bringing up the opposite. I said people who are anti-bike, you were bringing up the bike, but I also try to bring them into my world. I mean, I think one thing that I point out, and then I'll let Art talk, but I hear a lot about wanting to get freight off of our roadways for bike safety. And I get it. Those freight vehicles are huge. I'm terrified sometimes when I'm biking with my young kids near them. At the same time, you know, I like to ask folks, like, where do your bike parts come from? Shimano, SRAM, they're all made overseas. Like literally the only bike parts made in the US are Chris King. Everything else is overseas. So how are your bike parts going to get to the Port of Portland or Portland of Vancouver, come across the I-5 bridge and get to your bike shop? And how are you going to get your bike parts if that freight doesn't exist? I'm not saying it has to be by truck. Maybe we can reinvent the freight system, and maybe we can come up with cool electric bikes that pull them from the Port of Portland. But I also just encourage people to be part of the solution. Or, you know, I like to say everybody's organic pear and New Seasons got there somehow. So how is your organic pear going to get to New Seasons? And instead of just kind of yelling about the truck, like let's problem solve in this space, right? Yeah, maybe drones, great. Let's cool. Somebody do you know, study on drones, like come to the table and problem solve, because this stuff is hard.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll add is it is a little lonely in the middle. I'll just say it. You know, it was a lot easier as a young planner to conspire against government with community, because I could say that the man's over there and I'm just here helping out as best I can. That's been harder over the years as I've gotten into more and more responsible positions. I have a whole other presentation about the man and about learning how to interpret and break rules to help make change happen. But so I think that, you know, it's a tricky balance, because yeah, my friends that are part of Bike Loud and other environments really feel like we could be doing so much more. And honestly, we could, if for more money, if for more you know, expedient direction. But we are pushing as hard as we think we can at any given moment. And I think that's frustrating on the inside and on the outside. And I think that's the thing to keep just acknowledging is, yeah, this is really frustrating. If we were to tell you that we...
Oh, I think Art froze. Maybe we can go to the next question too. I don't know. I think he was wrapping up.
Okay. Yeah, he froze.
Okay.
He'll come back. Keith,
he'll come back.
Ask your question.
Yeah, you bet. So you're on, Margie.
Oh, okay, great.
A question regarding road use charge. So you were talking about how we're kind of funding upside down.
We are.
Stark difference versus the other states. So I know ODOT is just completing their road use charging test, where the central business district was like 12 cents per mile. If you drove in Multnomah County, it was 6 cents. And then if you drove in Oregon, it was like 1.8 cents per mile. So that would be direct funding that could go for bike lanes, road maintenance, and things like that. Where is Metro on that? Is that
yeah? Thanks for asking. This is like the future of transportation funding is one of my favorite topics. And so first of all, just the premise that the gas tax is broken. That's how we fund most of our transportation. Cars are getting more efficient, and on top of that, it's a regressive tax. So that's our major source of funding, and it's also restrictive. So we need to start looking at other funding sources. Art, we've moved on, and I just got a question about road user charge fee.
That's great. Yep.
So the gas tax needs to be replaced. Metro recently did a regional congestion pricing study, and we looked at 4 different ways of pricing the system. We looked at 4 different ways of pricing the system, not only because the gas tax needs to be replaced, but we also know that's a way to replace our climate goals and meet some of our other goals. The first thing we looked at was a road user charge fee, often also called the VMT tax in other places. Second, we looked at 2 different types of tolling or congestion pricing. One where we are tolling all the high volume roads. So this is across highway. And then a second that was called cordon pricing, which is across the bridges. And then fourth, we compared that to different levels of parking. And we looked and said, how do these perform across all of our priority areas that I listed? So how do they perform in greenhouse gases? How do they perform in safety? How do they perform in congestion relief? And what we found was that the road user charge fee, the VMT tax, performed the best across all 4 areas, and in particular reducing GHG. If you compare that to something of the cordon pricing, where you're just tolling the bridges, we saw in our model unintended impacts. You saw a lot of traffic diversion going into, for example, East Portland and having impacts. So I actually, through that study, was very convinced that we need to start taking the road user charge fee more seriously as an option and moving forward at the state. It will be interesting to see how that conversation plays out at the state and the federal level, while Oregon is also looking very seriously at tolling, and ODOT is on a path to put at least tolls on I-205 at this point. So we'll have to reconcile those 2 efforts, but I'll put a link to the chat in our study and you can see our findings.
Thank you. That'd be great.
Sean.
Hi. I just wanted to open with that. I do have a Chris King hub, by the way. We talked about having local parts.
Hey, what color? Did you have a mango? That's my
I got the gold.
Yes. Yeah, that's called the mango. The gold, no, the gold and the mango. I love it. Yeah. Awesome. Okay.
E-bike charging. I wanted to bring up. We ride our e-cargo bike almost exclusively now. We bought it just at the beginning of COVID, and we put over 6,000 miles on it, and it's a big part of our life. And we still have this like range anxiety sometimes when we go on long trips, like out to Gateway Green or something, and we're looking at a 40-mile day, and I will have to charge somewhere on my trip. And in Portland, it's very hard to find public power. Washington County, every park's got an outlet that I can charge. Multnomah County, no. It's very difficult to find. I can charge at OMSI sometimes, but that's the only one. And so I would, like to come up with a way that there would be more public charging, e-bike charging for all these e-bikes that people are buying that have this range anxiety, that they won't go all the way, they won't do a 20-mile trip because they're afraid they don't have enough power. So they'll take their car instead. But if there was an option to charge somewhere along the route, many options, I think people would take their e-bikes and not drive.
Nice. I think that's true. Jacob Sherman on the PBOT team is the one who would be the best person to connect you with. So he is our new mobility coordinator, and so he runs the scooter program. He's also working on electric vehicle and vehicle electrification. We just applied for a Department of Energy grant to bring additional fast chargers and trickle chargers, or whatever they're called, into a bunch of different locations, essentially with the premise that every commercial center needs to have at least one charging location. And let's just see if we can get that done, and then we'll move the bar up higher. And my recollection is he was looking at scooter charging as part of that as well. And so I can only assume that in the mix this could fit in, but I actually don't know how intentionally it's being thought of. So I actually think it would be a good conversation for you to have with him.
Might be a good project.
It would be a great project. Yeah, exactly.
It'd be a great project.
Really would. Yeah.
Kathy, you're up next.
So I'm really excited to dig into the road user charge fee that you just linked to, Margie. And, just generally, I'm looking at funding all the things that we want to fund. The lion's share of the budget seems to get eaten up by, highways and bridges and transit. But, we need a lot of money to go into the kind of systems that we want. I want to hear more about parking. I mean, I think that, parking is grossly underpriced in Portland. And I think that we're also not charging private parking at all. The parking lot fees could be a lot higher than they are, especially if we want to encourage, people not to drive their cars. So, just thoughts about that in general.
Totally agree. They're actually, your timing is good if you like public speaking and like to sign up for city council moments. Next Wednesday, the pricing options for equitable mobility recommendation will be coming to council. I believe it's next Wednesday. That would be a great moment to show up and reinforce that. There's recommendations in there specifically around both parking pricing and also other parking management tools, and then also talk to some recommendations around what we might use that revenue for in terms of producing more equitable outcomes. So that would be where I would put some energy for sure if you are interested.
Yeah, the city of Portland has done a lot of good policy work around parking, and they have actually quite, compared to the rest of the region, quite progressive parking policies. We are looking at updating a regional parking policy. It's a little different when Metro approaches it, because when we put it into our functional plan, it becomes a requirement across 24 cities. So that's everybody from Cornelius to Forest Grove. So we have to kind of have different approaches as we go forward. We do get some, we have a lot of smaller communities that say we don't need parking plans. We don't want any parking restrictions, but it's starting to become in the suburbs is an industrial land issue. There's huge parking lots that are just flat. If anybody's been out to the Tektronix site, it's like a big industrial site that just parking lot goes forever and forever. And it's not far from the Nike campus. And someone could look at that and say, that is a great opportunity for industrial land to keep that within the UGB and keep it in close into corridors, right? We want our industry to be close to airports or close to big roadways and not far out. And that resonates more with our suburban partners. So that's really interesting, saying, are we using parking lots where we could be building buildings, in particular building the, industrial land. So just an interesting take, but we'll be looking at our parking policy in the next couple of years here.
Great, thanks for that question. All very timely. Sam, you're up next.
I understand that congestion pricing and mileage fees are almost inevitable as the gas tax goes away, but I think an issue that we're concerned about on Hayden Island is, it's a $10 billion industry trading data on phones, but that's anonymous. It seems to me like you have good to go cards on the windshield, and if they don't have one, they use a license plate reader. With a license plate reader, it seems connects the anonymous information with you, your identity, which then can be sold by ODOT, perhaps. I mean, is that a concern? It seems to me like linking, you know, you with your phone and suddenly have that out in the open market is a phenomena that needs to be addressed. And I don't know if that's an issue or not.
I think, you know, privacy concerns. So just so you know, there's people in our industry who know a lot about toll operations. I don't have a background in tolling operations, but the technology has changed and improved quite a bit. It's honestly not too different than what happens in an automated enforcement situation where you get ticketed and you get your license plate in your face, and then they find your address and they send it home to you. I think that government probably has more information on you than you probably realize through various agencies. And so I'm not trying to spook you, but I think that there's lots of technologies that have come along to protect that and to do it different ways. And you look at, you know, anybody where from Florida to New Jersey to, you know, any of the heavy toll states, Texas, and they don't have privacy problems down there. Like, I don't hear privacy breaches very often, but you'd have to ask somebody who knows more about how those systems work.
Thank you.
I don't know. I probably didn't calm your fears, give you a little bit of a big brother, but it's it's part of how we live these days, unfortunately.
Yeah. Art, before you left, there was you're in mid-sentence about a couple of things. Do you want to wrap up what you had, what your thoughts were? Do you remember?
No, I can't remember where you lost me, so I think it's okay. If it, but we can start a new conversation that'll similarly take us to a spot, I'm sure. Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions for our guests tonight?
I have a question. When I talked about change management for cities, and I showed a whole bunch of kind of bureaucratic tools that we use, what of it felt like it was actually making a difference to you? Like, which of it was like, oh, wow, that's a good one. I'm glad you guys are doing that. Who has thoughts on what felt effective, perceived or otherwise? Leslie, no, I know. Yeah. I'm with you. Other thoughts?
Corin.
So I thought the slide that showed the public and most of the people at the beginning of the curve, it was the end
right.
when it went down, was a really good thing to remember. I'm a member of the Portland Bicycle Advisory Committee.
Oh, yeah.
And I feel like, I mean, I loved your change management. That's what I did in a former life.
Okay.
I thought that was great. But when we're listening to projects on the BAC, it always feels like autos get the right of way, the money, the space, and pedestrians, bikes, and transit are left to fight over the scraps. And so I feel like in reality, we're really far away from that.
Yes. Yep. Thank you for being on that committee. I know that's a lot of work.
Any more thoughts? I see in the chat that Keith says enabled him to see that patience and understanding is key to effective change.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a huge point.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to thank you, our guests, for being here. If you don't have any more thoughts or questions, we're really delighted to have you both again tonight. And we've always learned so much, especially during now when things are constantly changing. And this is like every year, it's a brand new cohort. And one of the things I wanted to mention is that we have a wide range of age in this course right now. We have a 15-year-old and a high schooler and a sophomore in high school. So, and ranging from 15 to 65. So there's a huge demographic change in this course. I think we're planning for the future in so many different ways. So I want to bring that to light. The students are working on some great homework, and we're planning for a field trip on November 18th. Cross my fingers for Delta. I think it's going to work out this time, but we're joined with Oregon Walks to do a field trip, and we're going to be working on that. And my field trips always start or end with some sort of a lunch. So we're planning for a pho lunch on November 13th after our field trip on 82nd Avenue. So that's in the works right now and what we're planning on doing. More than welcome. You're more than welcome to come and join us for that. For now, the students are really working on their class projects. So that's one of the biggie is by next week, my ask is for them to really hone down on what their thoughts are, define their transportation problem that they want to solve, and start to do their research.
Right on. Well, I'll just say thank you all for not giving up on us. I really appreciate the fact that you care and that you're spending your evening trying to make Portland better. That's just really nice. So I really appreciate it. If you're looking for a cool show this weekend, we're going to be putting the Blumenauer Bridge in place. Saturday night would be that's what I'm planning to do with my Saturday night. So I'd recommend coming out to check it out. I think it's going to be quite a thing.
So it's going to be right outside my office.
Right.
I'm going to be able to see it. I can't wait. I'm just going to go into the office on Saturday night and watch. I'm so excited.
Totally.
But what time? What time?
It's going to be all weekend, but I think Saturday evening, like Saturday in the late afternoon into the evening, it will be when the most action will be. And it's going to be going all night though, I think, before they into Sunday, and they have to have it open by Monday morning at 5 a.m. So they're going to be working the whole time.
All
Can
right.
you share what the best place to view that from would be if we're just going to show?
I was going to go to Lloyd Boulevard and kind of see if I can get an angle. I was also going to check out whether 12th, the 12th Avenue Bridge was a good enough view. I don't know. I'm going to be biking around looking for angles. I think there'll be a lot of gawkers. So I'll see you out gawking. We can catch up in person.
Definitely bridge party, Kathy.
Totally. When it's open, we all need to.
Who's going to bring Art whiskey for the ride? Bye. Thanks.
Yep.
Bye. I'm here if anybody have any more questions.